This is Pop Culture Yearbook. On this show, we pick pieces of pop culture that were important to us in a given year. We then discuss our memories and dig into those movies, albums, shows, and more. I'm Brad.
I'm Pete.
And no GIF. GIF is not going to be on.
Well done.
Thank you. I just thought of that at that exact moment.
It kept the rhythm that the fans are used to.
Right.
And the fans are really the most important people when it comes to this show, right?
Oh, well, and so speaking of, we're going to call this Fans Month because we'll go through here in a second what we're doing again. But
I am opening the yearbook for you, the fans, this time around.
Yes. This will be the most special insert of all, the one that you would want to keep. So Gifford is not going to be on with us for the next 2 weeks. He's going through some issues at home that he just needs to focus on. So nothing bad. Don't worry about it.
Everything's fine. He's fine.
I don't want to say that in a way that makes it sound weird or anything.
I think he's having some electrical work or something like that, and that's it.
But that's why there's no GIF. And so tonight we are doing an interview with Gary Graff, who we had on in January for the 501 Essential Albums of the 90s. Please go back. It was just this year. And check out that interview if you missed it. If you like 90s music, you're sure to like that one. But he came out with a new book, 501 Essential Albums of the 80s. And so that should appeal to a lot of our audience. And we are interviewing him tonight to talk about his newest entry into these wonderful books. And
he's
so
a fun listen. I could listen to him all day.
Yeah, and we had a really nice interview, Pete and I, with him, and you're sure to enjoy it. And if you stick around till the end, that's where it gets a little more controversial. We kind of ease into it a little bit, but at the end, we definitely get into some of the more controversial things.
You're gonna want to listen all the way through. Yeah, I promise.
That's my way of saying, you can't shut it off.
It will not be disappointing.
But it is Fans Month. Let's just throw out, just to remind people what we said last week. Next week, we're going to do Run DMC, which is because that was a choice of a fan who has helped and supported our show. And then our other ones are all going to be based on the polls that we put out last month, things that the fans picked and liked a lot. So we are choosing our topics based on that. And so we're really excited about this month, but tonight with Gary Graff is definitely a great way to start.
Yes, absolutely. Should we start it up?
Should we start it up? Okay, well, here we go. Enjoy the interview with Gary.
Here it is.
Okay, so we are here now to start our second interview with Gary Graff. We had a great time with him. It was back in January, I believe, when that one came out, when we talked about the 90s book, and he had mentioned they were going to put an 80s book out, and lo and behold, it didn't take very long. And we got an email asking if we wanted to talk about it again, and we're really excited for that because this is one of our favorite interviews. So we're going to kind of go back and forth here with our questions for you tonight. My first question, though, that I thought of before I even really started reading this is, you had a pretty big cast of people who helped write, the other one. How many of those people, if any, carried over? I didn't actually look and compare, every name, but how many of those carried over from the panel from the 90s book? And how did you put this group together if it was any different?
This book's largely the same people. There are a couple of new folks who got added, and then a few folks who were wrote for the 90s book are not part of the 80s book. Some of that was a bookkeeping request from the publisher, who I guess got tired of sending out the W-9s and receiving the invoices. I don't know that I would agree to that again. I did miss some of the people, but it's largely the same cast of characters and a few additions.
Okay.
Interesting. So I did want to tag on. This isn't one of our scripted questions, Brad, but
okay, going off script already here.
You did. I thought of it because you mentioned how quickly we turned around the 80s book after the 90s book. About how long does it take you from start to finish to make these books? Because they're so thorough and they're so good, and to come up with 501, it's amazing that you could do that.
Well, thank you. I think between the two of them, it was about 18 months. And it seemed like a good idea at the time to do one after the other. I don't know.
Yeah.
As I got to the end of the 80s books, I was questioning perhaps the wisdom of that. But we did get them done. And in some ways, the 80s, the books are not in any way easy, but the 80s was easier because we already had the template. We were practiced.
Yes.
We were kind of in the groove. The writers knew what was expected of them. I had my flow, really well practiced. So the 80s did feel a little bit smoother. But like I said, one literally flowed into the other. We were already working on the 80s when we were putting the finishing touches on the 90s.
I'm going to follow
Sure.
up on that now too, Pete. So I think I know the answer just the way you're talking, but so have you planned, have you already started a 70s or have you planned to it? It sounds like maybe you're in between right now and not working on it currently.
At the moment, we're waiting for a green light on whatever the next decade will be. I mean, I guess the aughts are in play, but I certainly would like to go to the 70s first. And yes, I do have a spreadsheet already started on that, and some of the what I euphemistically call discussions have begun about what's gonna be in the 70s. And because you are gonna face things there like, okay, so which Led Zeppelin album don't you put in from the 70s and all those Rolling Stones albums? And
right.
Well, that'll be, I have a question about a certain 80s band tonight too when we get to that, about one that was left out. And as you said in the last book, it's meant to lead to arguments.
It is arguments and discussions, as long as we take it at the basis of all that I'm right, we're fine.
I don't know. He's wearing a Detroit Lions t-shirt.
That's going to be right until we get into the season, at least.
Yeah.
We're still riding last season.
Yeah.
As we talked about,
hopefully our quarterback is good this year, and we'll catch up to you. But it was a rough finish at the end.
We have different plans.
As we talk about how the one book kind of segued into the other, is there one of the books that you found to be harder to choose and kind of narrow down your selection than the other? I know that the logistics of the second book was easier to write, but as far as choosing who gets in and who's left out.
Yeah, 80s was tougher for a lot of reasons, not the least of which was this was a decade where you had, and even more so than the 90s, you had a lot of significant artists putting out significant albums almost on a yearly basis.
Yeah, every year.
I mean, REM, Talking Heads. Thank you, Bruce Springsteen, for only putting out 4 albums in the 80s. Prince. Oh Lord, Prince, Madonna.
Yeah.
They just were, and so you had to really sit down and say, no, we can't have every REM album in it. It just is.
As much as Brad would love that.
And I would.
That's the band I'm going to bring up a little later.
A number of people do, and we made some tough decisions about REM and about Talking Heads and about Prince to not include certain albums, and we really had to sharpen our definition of what essential means.
Right.
And it's a great exercise. Again, I euphemistically call them discussions, and we had them in the same way we had in the 90s books in a lot of the same places. You might remember I told you, because those of us in Detroit who are daily working music journalists, and we still often ended up at the same concerts together. So the euphemistic discussions just transferred from the 80s to the 90s to the 80s. And we still had the people sitting around us gesturing to security that, they might start swinging at each other any minute, So we had that going. And in some ways, more impassioned, because I think the 80s are a more passionate music decade.
I think Brad and I would probably, speaking on behalf of Brad, as I so often do, we would probably personally connect to the 90s more than the 80s, even though we love both decades as far as music. Is there either of these two decades or books that you felt more personally connected to?
I mean, because I was day to day, in real time covering both decades, not really, but the 80s was my first decade out of college.
Sure.
I graduated in 82, came here to Detroit to work 83 or in 82, June of 82, and was here for the arrival of MTV and the arrival of New Age and the Michael Jackson mania and the Bruce mania and Madonna and CDs. And I was much younger and had a great deal more hair then. So there's a lot of sentimentality for me to that decade, and other things started my family in the 80s, and so that there is a real attachment to the things that happened there. So yeah, it was a more sentimental exercise, and I smiled a lot more doing the 80s book, and then looked in the mirror with the significantly less hair than I had in the 80s and shed a tear or two.
Sure.
Well, I do think you were right, Pete, that we personally maybe connected because we were buying albums like all the time in the 90s. So when it comes to full albums, that was like the prime of it for us. In the 80s, we heard all the songs on the radio. We knew all the artists. But I was surprised going back, like how many of these albums that either I owned like on either a record or a tape, or like my brother or sister, somebody in my family had, where I did, have access to the full album, or, how many then I went and bought later in the 90s once I, had money and everything. So that's where I was wondering if I would get into this book as much. And I think I might have liked it even more, actually. Just there was more memory. There was so much that came out of this book. And one of those things, will be, I think, Pete's next question, just the variety. But before that, I just want to say, you talked about the branding of the decade. One of my favorite things about these books is this book, especially the page number, the pages for the year. Like, so at the beginning of a year, you've got a 2-page, spread. It says 1984, but just the look of it is just so cool. It's so 80s, the colors, the way it pops, and it's like it gets you excited to turn the page for what came that year. So these books are visually awesome. I think we said that last time, but you did it again with this one, and with the 80s, it maybe was even more fun that way because it does have that stuff you associate with that decade.
And the photography too, by the way. I know obviously the photography is mostly from the 80s and everything, but just the pictures that are selected helps it pop like that, right? And it's just so awesome. The amazing pictures that you see of each of the artists. It's so fun.
And I'll speak on behalf of the design staff and say thank you. They have it, this publisher, and this is 6th or 7th book I've done with them, and they have just an incredible design staff that really makes every book they do, even the ones written by other people, makes them look just fabulous. And it's such a play, and that's very motivational when we are putting in the hard work and writing and editing. Part of the inspiration is we know how good this is going to look when it comes out.
Yeah, even just on the side of the pages, like when the book is closed, all the years you have color coded.
Yeah.
But it reminds me like of Trivial Pursuit looking at it, like the wedges. I don't know what it is, but it's such a simple little detail. And the 90s one had it too, but it just makes you think of things from that time, at least for me. So maybe that's weird, but
great designers. That's all I can say, and I'm happy they're on my team.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that stood out to me big time is the variety of music. And this is true about the 90s book too. Just the variety of music that you thought to include in this book. I open it up, and page 1 is the banger of an album. It's AC/DC, Back in Black. But then you turn into it, and it also has within the book, it's Little Mermaid. Right. And it's like, it's probably the only book in history that has those two bands listed, on the same list. And so the variety of music I speak to is that you do have some early remnants of alternative music like REM and In Excess, as just a couple of examples. You have Michael Hutchins, Brad, you added that one in there.
I love the quote describing him as Mick Jagger meets Jim Morrison. I thought that was, I love Michael Hutchins. I think In Excess I just think they're the greatest, and they should be in the Hall of Fame. But that was such a great way of describing him. He does have both of those guys in him. And so I wanted to point out that quote.
And then you had metal, of course. I already spoke to AC/DC, Metallica, Motley Crue, Def Leppard, and a whole lot more. Americana, with examples like Springsteen and Mellencamp, which kind of got the birth. It kind of reminds you of, like, just for the blue collar, everyday working man. You had country music that kind of did that before, but this is where you kind of saw that in rock as much as any other decade. And then of course you have hip hop, which is sort of when the decade when hip hop sort of took the stage with like Run DMC, BC Boys, and of course many others there as well. Just a variety was just fun to. That's part of the fun of it, is that. You just have one band that could be metal, and then the next page or the next item could be something completely different. You might come across Cats or something like that right after Metallica. I don't know if they were together or not, but I'm just throwing that out as an example.
Well, the 80s has had this great shelf life within our culture. But there is this aspect of it when you say 80s to somebody, they think of the spandex and the hairspray and the fishnets and the new wave and Duran Duran and Human League and that's what a lot of people think of when you say the word, when you say the 80s to them, and they think the Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink and John Hughes and all of that stuff. But like any decade, there's so much more within the culture and certainly within music. So part of the mission really was to demonstrate that and smack people upside the head a little maybe and say, this was also the decade of the Lonesome Jubilee and Graceland and Tracy Chapman's first album and commissioned, the gospel band and remind people that there was all sorts of music in the 80s, and there was a growing palette in the 80s, partly thanks to hip hop and the beginning of techno, much more pop.
Oh, yeah.
When, if we do get to do the 70s book, there is going to be a slightly smaller palette than we experienced in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But we did, variety, the diversity of the decade was key. And of course, in the 90s, that grew even more exponentially.
Do you think, this is another question I just thought of now, but do you think a lot of that variety, did MTV have something to do with that? Like that it allowed more groups to have a stage where people wanted to see them. Because when you think of 70s, I think you mostly think of rock and easy listening kind of maybe stuff like that. But I don't know, the MTV starting in 1981, I would just think there must be a pretty big connection between those two things.
There isn't, certainly for more acts of a certain kind. I mean, the first 3-4 years of MTV was really about who has videos we can play.
Right.
The Buggles do, and Pat Benatar did, and but the U.S. record market in particular didn't make videos like the European market did. So you had this explosion of the British New Wave, that was part of MTV and popularized by MTV. I think if I don't know if maybe if James Taylor and Joni Mitchell and Jackson Browne and Led Zeppelin and all these 70s acts had videos for MTV to play, we might not have gotten Duran Duran or all these British and European acts. That's an interesting scenario that we just have no answer for, because it wasn't that way. I don't think MTV necessarily popularized gospel or country of the 80s, but it did broaden the rock and pop and R&B and then ultimately rap. It did kind of stoke the market a little bit for a lot of those acts. Mm-hmm. So yes, definitely. Long way of saying yes, definitely part of it, but wait, there's more.
Yeah. What MTV and music videos did do is that they solidified the importance of trademark visuals for certain groups. And what I mean, I think of Devo was the one that made me think of that question, right? It's like they had the hats where you just see the hats and right away that's Devo, and that becomes more and more important. You think of back a decade into the 70s, nobody really had, for the most part. Some did, but they really didn't have those kinds of trademark looks that they did in the 80s. You know, you think of some examples. I had Cyndi Lauper. Everybody knew her big red hair and her flashy style, flocks of seagulls, the hair. Madonna had her look, Michael Jackson, and as you said, Duran Duran. It really made it more important for bands and artists to stand out visually as much as with their music.
Yeah, well, we were looking at our music. We weren't just listening to it. We were
Yes.
looking to it, and you did have to stand out like that. That's why when we think of the 80s, we think of so many fashions, because the video may have killed the radio star, but video helped the fashion industry.
That's true.
And gave us all sorts of looks. I mean, I do dare you to find another decade that sold more spandex or fishnets in it. It just, it wouldn't have happened because that was so much a part of the visual end.
That's right.
Of the 80s. And the artists, it got slammed a lot because, it's all about the flash and the image and the looks. But no, the artists that rose to the top in the 80s, that were the cream of the 80s, were making pretty good music too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was thinking too that, I mean, maybe it would have happened with cable TV anyway, but like, you said MTV, they weren't playing country and other ones, but their success probably led to like the National Network, which my parents would watch, and country music television, which exploded in the 90s with, that became like, it was almost like the country was almost a decade behind with the giant stars and the big videos that took place with like Garth Brooks and Shania Twain.
And BET too, Black Entertainment Television.
Yeah, I was going to say that one too. Yeah.
I mean, cable created the landscape, the environment for all of those, but MTV was what showed all the other networks what they can do with music programming. And so if you were going to do something country or Southern flavored, then the music needed to be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So my one of my first big things I noticed in the book, and again, I want to beat MTV to death here, but this is 2 years after it came out, and so maybe that has something where bands were starting, really get into that whole idea of the visuals. But Pete apparently noticed the same thing. The year that stood out to me, and I think of like a lot of different years in the 80s being big, but 1983 was just full of classics and variety as well. So I just going to list off like the ones that really stood out to me here, if that's okay.
Sure.
Before you do that, let me just, you had alluded to it, but Brad and I were working independently, just kind of taking our own notes and everything. We came together and both of us, when we started talking about this, said 1983 just pops with the music. And that's what Brad's about to list off there.
Okay.
So we're going to talk a little later about country music. We just did a big episode on 80s country, so hopefully you have some thoughts on that. But Alabama, The Closer You Get, had a big country album, kind of that whole pop country fusion. Huey Lewis, Sports, one of the first tapes I ever owned as a kid. You got David Bowie coming back with Let's Dance. You got Billy Idol, Rebel Yell. You got one of the, not really hair metal yet maybe, but Pyromania, the giant big one from Def Leppard. But then also Quiet Riot.
Right.
Madonna's debuts in 1983. Night Ranger with Sister Christian, and a pretty great album besides. Billy Joel's got a great one. He kind of switched, his maybe sound. Some people don't like some of the 80s stuff, but like it was giant. John Mellencamp's You got Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil. Metallica debuts in 1983 with Kill 'Em All. New Order, one of the great alternative ones in here, plus REM, Murmur, my favorite band, their first album. The Police, Synchronicity, which is one of the biggest ones of the year. You got Talking Heads, Speaking in Tongues. You got Lionel Richie, who was ginormous. One of the best U2 albums in war. And then ZZ Top, Eliminator, which was all over MTV every time you turned it on. I don't know. Those are just... And I left some out, but those are the ones that like.
Don't forget about Cyndi Lauper.
Yeah, see, I'm not a huge fan of her. I included just the ones that I really liked, but we could go on and on there. Maybe Pete had a couple others that stood out. I don't really have a question. Just what did you think about 1983, or was there a year that popped to you? even if it wasn't that year.
They all pop. Especially in the 80s, because let's go to 1984. Born in the USA,
Oh, yeah.
Purple Rain, Like a
Yeah.
Virgin, Heartbeat City, Bryan Adams, Reckless, the Judds, Why Not Me, Bob Marley, Legend, the Ghostbusters sound. So we could do that. We could just do the needle drop on any given year here and find, which is part of what made the 80s special too. And just find an onslaught of really significant albums. I think 83 though, I think was maybe the year it started to become the 80s, because every decade's kind of like this. You have the previous decade hangover for a while, and then there's this gradual transition into the new decade, and I think 83 is all 80s. Really, there's not as much we've left a lot of the vestiges of the 70s behind, and even the artists who were working in the 70s by 83 started to sound like they were in the 80s. And so I think and it would be interesting to go back and look at, say, 1993, and with that, and I can't, I have to say off the top of my head, I can't tell you what that year looked like, but I wouldn't be surprised if that year looked like the year that really became that the 90s gained their footing.
I could see that. Couple years into the grunge, and things really start to turn.
Yeah, so that's kind of my guess at why that happens in a culture is you do have the clock doesn't strike midnight on December 31st, 1979, and it becomes the 80s. You need a little while. You need the studio technology.
Well, we have a really close podcast friend that we listen to, and they always talk about 1990 as being part of the 80s. Like you just said, they call it 1980-10 because it was so much like the 80s still, and nothing really changed much until 91, and then after that. So based on what you just said, I throw that out there.
Sure. No, that's a good possibility, definitely.
Just to have one question on 83, did you have a favorite album in 1983? The ones, maybe not even ones I listed. It could be something else, I guess. Of course,
I'm trying to think. I mean, Murmur's certainly up there. That's an album, and I don't listen to many albums. I don't listen to many old albums because I'm too busy listening to new music. But definitely that was one that I that has stayed with me. Kill 'Em All, Metallica, I liked a lot. Power, Corruption, and Lies, New Order, certainly one when I get a chance. I do like to listen to 90125. I was a big Yes fan from the 70s, and I was one of the folks, but I embrace that as their new direction. And probably Speaking in Tongues, Talking Heads. We got our first earful of Stevie Ray Vaughan, with Texas Flood, and Was Not Was, Born to Laugh at Tornadoes, coming from the deeper end of it. That's, that was a band that never made a bad album, but that one really was a step ahead of what they've done before.
All right.
So being from Minnesota, and I did this when we talked about the 90s as well, but I did have to make mention of the Minnesota connections that are listed in the book. A lot of overlap between the 80s and 90s. Of course, you have Prince, the Time with Morris Day as a producer in the Star Company, very closely associated with Prince. The Replacements, Husker Du and Bob Mould, Bob Dylan, and then, of course, Janet, we have Terry Lewis, Jimmy Jam, and Jelly Bean Johnson. Those were the ones that I could come up with. There might have been others. Brad, was there any that stand out to you that I missed in that list, or?
I don't remember any that you missed. I don't remember if
there wasn't a ton there.
Were the Jets on there anywhere?
The Jets were not in the book.
Okay, I didn't think so.
No, I didn't think so. I looked for them. They were one.
They were just big there for a minute. That's the one I.
That was it, and it was more with them. And it's funny with a lot of the '80s artists who aren't in the book. It was really because it was about a song, maybe two, and it wasn't about albums they made, even if those songs drove those albums to great sales. When you really talked about the album, it was like, not a great album, certainly not an essential album.
I would ask how you did decide on all. So Prince had how many? I don't know, one every year, maybe two
Yeah.
at times.
Oh yeah.
You ended up picking 4 Prince albums, and then you also had like The Time and Sheila E. I think there were like 3 others that like he helped produce. Or
Right.
how did you narrow down the Prince ones, and did you almost have more?
We could have almost had more. I think, there was a lot of discussion about controversy, which we didn't put in the book. I did not think it was as strong an album as either Dirty Mind or 1999. Around the World in the Day kind of had some cool songs, but as an album didn't hang together quite as well. So, really, it really was about some of the albums we didn't think were as strong as the masterpieces.
Yeah.
There
I think
were,
you had the biggest ones in there.
we had Dirty
Mind,
Mind,
Purple Rain.
1999, Purple Rain, Sign of the Times. Those are masterpieces. So in some ways Prince worked maybe a little against himself, by setting a bar so high that the others, maybe didn't pale next to as much compared to other albums in the 80s as they paled compared to other Prince albums in the 80s.
Yeah. Well, when you put out that much music, it's
Yeah.
going to be hard to keep that high of a level all the time.
Exactly. And REM much the same way, although they had a uniformity of strength that was almost unparalleled in the rock world. I mean, maybe Led Zeppelin, maybe the Beatles, but we're talking about that level of quality that REM demonstrated really throughout the 80s. So that made it really, really tough. We could have put any of their 80s albums in this book and justified it.
The next category here, just a few bands that I thought of I wanted to ask about, and I'll move up. So REM is one of them. So as I've said, they're my favorite band of all time. So you had Murmur on there, their debut makes sense. You had Fables of the Reconstruction, which that was a little surprising, but I love it. And you had Document, which again is very popular and kind of where they had the first top 10 hit and everything. But I wonder how you picked them. And the one that I couldn't believe didn't make it is Life's Rich Pageant. And I just couldn't believe it wasn't on there. So I want to hear a justification.
Great album. That's where the essential thing kind of came in and saying, okay, something like Murmur, obviously, we really felt like Fables had so much of there was so many harbingers of REM future on that album, and so much them taking chances. That's what gave it kind of the nudge above something like Life's Rich Pageant, which was a great album. They were all great albums, but felt like, retrenchment, not standing still necessarily, but like, okay, this is the next REM album. Whereas I feel like the ones we chose were really the signpost albums.
Okay. Well, and I just realized
we're going.
That you picked the first, the third, and the fifth. So it's like every other one, which maybe they had tried something different a little bit, there. And maybe that's how maybe it wasn't on purpose, but I just realized that you kind of had the every other one.
Yeah. And again, pivot, I think we decided these were essentials because they were pivot points or had enough pivot points on them that it was like, no, you gotta listen to this if you listen. And then, the others followed suit with those. That was tough. REM, I will tell you, was the toughest.
Yeah.
And Prince was probably the second toughest.
I got 2 more I want to ask about here, but I didn't count them up. Do you remember or know, was there a certain band or artist that had the most in there? Was 4 the most by Prince?
I think 4 was the most. Prince, Springsteen had 4.
Okay.
Madonna, I think, had 4.
Yeah, she probably was. She was in there several times.
In there, and there might have been one other that had 4, but that was the most.
Okay. So we kind of talked about, the decades and they blend together. I was just curious if Nirvana's Bleach was like considered, since it's so different and they went on to be, so big, but came out in 89. What did you discuss about that and how that would fit in?
We did talk about that. It was considered in the end. It's really not that great an album. And if Nevermind hadn't happened, Bleach would have faded off into obscurity. So, there were other albums coming from that scene
Yeah.
Husker Du, the Minutemen, that we felt were better and more essential albums.
Okay. And I wasn't surprised at all that he didn't make it. I was just curious. And then to switch gears here, so we were 10, 11 years old when this started coming out. One of the biggest artists in the world to me and Pete was Debbie Gibson.
Yeah.
And so it's fun to see her in there. I didn't realize till I read this, or maybe I forgot, that she actually came out after Tiffany, because I always thought Tiffany wrote her coattails.
Yeah.
But I do know, Debbie Gibson, she wrote her own songs, unlike I think Tiffany, and she was the youngest to ever write, produce, and perform a #1 hit, Foolish Beat. So, I think of her as, we were in love with her as young boys, but do you give her credit, like that she was actually maybe more talented than people would look back and think, or was she just representing that whole idea of like teen mall pop?
Bubblegum, yeah.
Kind of both, but the reason we chose her to represent that was because she was the best and most credible of that, because she was a very young but still a songwriter, still a creative, somebody who at least had that credit, had a greater credibility than many of what you would consider her peers.
I agree. That's why, with the discussion of Debbie Gibson and Tiffany, it's an easy answer for me.
Hands down. Yeah.
A big portion of music that we listened to in the 80s, and this is kind of where it got its start, is movie soundtracks. Yep. So before the 80s, they existed to a degree, but you didn't really associate soundtracks with movies, certainly not in the way that you did in the 1980s. And Kenny Loggins was the king of that, right?
Yep.
And he's accounted for on one or just a couple of these.
We've got Footloose and Top Gun in here.
Yep. And so I've got, I counted 14, unless I missed one or two. And one of them depends on whether or not you count Purple Rain as a soundtrack. But I'm going to run through them quickly. We had Back to the Future, Dirty Dancing, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Ghostbusters, La Bamba, Rocky IV, Stay Awake, which is the Disney one, Blade Runner, Footloose, When Harry Met Sally, Cats, Phantom of the Opera, Little Mermaid, and
Purple Rain,
and Top Gun, which you had mentioned, right? So,
you missed that one, Top Gun.
I did miss that one, and on our list, and then you mentioned.
At least I think
that
was in the 80s book.
I'm pretty sure it was.
Could have been a 90s. Like I said, we talked about the two of them coming together. No, Top Gun's in this book.
Okay, I must have just missed it, but that was kind of my list. But talk about, talk a little bit about soundtracks in general and sort of the rise of that in the 80s.
Huge story in the 80s, and I remember writing about it at the time. So, as you mentioned, we came out of the 70s with some monster soundtracks. We had, of course, Saturday Night Fever, among the king of them. And what the music industry and movie industries learned was, especially with the development of MTV, is the synergy you could have between the two of them. The movies could sell the music could sell the movies. You could have a video for Don't Forget About Me that was essentially an advertisement for the Breakfast Club. You could have people coming to the theaters to see Top Gun and then go out and buy Kenny Loggins music. They really learned how to work hand in hand, and it was a feeding frenzy by record companies to, first of all, get the license for the soundtrack, and then to get their artists, synced into the soundtrack. And that eventually extended into the advertising world, and seeing, Eric Clapton, a reformed alcoholic, in a Michelob ad, and seeing, a Steve Winwood song selling. I think that was Michelob too. And Genesis sold something, and Robert Plant sold Coke, Coca-Cola, not Coke. He bought Coke. He didn't say, but he sold Coca-Cola. So you started to see that as an outgrowth of what we saw in the movie, the synergy between movies and music. So that was a huge growth segment of the market, and everything had, every movie had a soundtrack, and wanted to have a hit. The studios wanted to have every movie have a hit song. You had the Breakfast Club, which, resurrected Motown in a way. That combined with Motown 25, all of a sudden Motown became hot again in the 80s. So it really was a business relationship as much as, if not more than, a creative relationship. But it sure got us some fun stuff. I mean, some great songs, were part of movie soundtracks.
Absolutely.
And some fun videos that, if you do go to YouTube or see them now or catch them on some nostalgic show, you have these very warm memories about watching them back in the day and what they represented back in the day.
Yeah. Sure.
The two that kind of stood out to me that I think were not maybe as big of a soundtrack, they were big movies, that kind of just made me smile to see them on there. One was The Little Mermaid, because but like that was a CD I bought when I bought a CD player. A lot of people had that one. But I love When Harry Met Sally is one of my favorite movies, and that's how I got into Harry Connick. And so it's a Harry Connick album,
right?
But it is the soundtrack for the movie. And I'm just wondering how you settled on including those two, especially when Harry Met. Is it more about the Harry Connick thing, or
right. Well, what you said. So exactly what you said with When Harry Met Sally. That was the birth of Harry Connick. Really, he'd been around, but that was that. And then the
Catapult.
Right, and The Little Mermaid was the rebirth of the Disney musical.
Yeah,
and all of a sudden, you had kids walking around humming "Part of Your World" and Down by the Sea or Under the Sea.
Under the Sea, yeah.
And, suddenly Disney songs, which once upon a time had been pop hits and part of the zeitgeist, and Disney had lost that for a great many years there. And Little Mermaid brought it back. And then we got Beauty and the Beast and Pocahontas and Tarzan and all of that stuff. So yeah, birth and rebirth in those two cases.
All right. So I wanted to talk a little bit. We just did a couple weeks ago a big 2-part episode. So all three of us that run this show, we grew up on farms in southwestern Minnesota. And we were, 5 years old in 1981. And our parents were listening to country music. And this was a time where country music was, I think, the best it ever was. And it had that pop appeal, a lot of it too. But you had a lot of country albums on here that we discussed and that you included. So like George Jones from 1980, which has what I think is the best country music song of all time. He Stopped Loving Her Today.
Sure.
Don't know if you have any thoughts on that or not.
It's just a great tune, and definitely one you can put in that discussion.
Yeah. You had Roseanne Cash, 7-Year Ache, which we talked about on here. The song that all of us loved as kids was Elvira, Oak Ridge Boys.
Hated that song.
Yeah, well, I can see that, but
I can see, but you can see how it would appeal to a 5-year-old kid, right? And so,
but it appealed to a lot of the country.
So. Yeah.
Alabama had 2 entries on here. John Anderson was a fun one to see because we talked about the song "Swingin'," which we just love.
Very underappreciated artist in country heritage in general.
George Strait blew up the scene here in the 80s. You mentioned the Judds a few minutes ago. Randy Travis, Dwight Yoakam, and then there's 2 more I just want to mention. So one that shocked me to see on here, but it's one of my dad's favorite tapes he would put in his truck and listen to, is Highway 101. I'm shocked to see that on the list, but loved it because I personally remember that so well. And I wanted to throw out the lead singer, Paulette Carlson, is from Minnesota and got her start here. So that one, and then there's one you left off, but I want to just give you a chance maybe to talk about the influence of country music or any of those that stood out to you first.
So country in the 80s was really kind of interesting because it was not what it would become in the 90s. Its older heroes were fading. I mean, we did get Pancho and Lefty in there, and the new heroes weren't being embraced in the same way as the old heroes were. We weren't yet feel like we were creating generational talents. Now George Strait obviously went on to become that. The Judds went on to become that. So country was listing a little in the 80s, but that doesn't mean there wasn't good music coming from them. Alabama was a monster band. without a doubt. And you had, the others you identified. Those were the ones we said were okay. If you want to understand country's place in the 80s, these were the artists making the essential country music during this decade and really laying the foundation for what was going to come in the 90s. You did have artists here. I'd throw Foster and Lloyd in there because we have them in the book as well, and Highway 101. And you were starting to see the pivot to the embrace of more pop and rock flavors. Mm-hmm. That would become the story of the 90s.
Yeah. Well, and of course, Garth Brooks, kind of like Nirvana, hits in 1989. Right. They didn't hit like he did, but right at the end of that decade there.
You had that great class in 1989. It was Garth and Alan Jackson and Travis Tritt. And I think Clint Black was 88, if I'm remembering. But
yeah, he was we talked about him. He made it in the 80s a little bit. The one I got to ask about, so we extensively talked about the year 1981, and we could not get away from this artist. You did not have Juice Newton, Juice on there.
We did not have Juice Newton.
3 giant crossover hits.
We did not have Juice Newton or Eddie Rabbit,
Eddie Rabbit, yeah.
Or even on the spreadsheet. And that's because what I would say to you was, those songs, but you'd now go listen to the albums. Okay. And we would rather have that second Alabama record in there. I'd rather have Highway 101 recognized. I'd rather have Foster and Lloyd in there because I think they created more essential music and also music that was pointing more towards the future than, what I would identify as lame ass pop crossover.
Okay.
And I thought the Juice one,
but we didn't feel strongly about
it. Yeah, right. She had 3 big ones, so I thought that'd be enough for the album to make it. But
it wasn't essential. It was like, and sometimes when I fall back on the final decision making, it was, would I give this album to somebody that I genuinely like? And it's not a gag gift.
Okay.
And if I can't say I would, and I couldn't with Juice and Eddie, then they're not going to be in the book.
Yeah. Well, I haven't listened to the full album, so I can't say whether you're right or wrong, but I do know that we definitely like Juice and Eddie here, and we're probably a little sad to see them not make it.
It's tied to your childhood memories.
And for sure is.
You were very young and less discriminating back then.
Well, and we're not even big country music fans to start with, but this was the country music we grew up with, and this is the stuff I really, really love. Yeah. So you're right.
But it to me, like I said, it was just so lightweight, and so it didn't merit any sort of mention under the name essential.
All right. Speaking of not being mentioned in the book, is there any artist or album in particular that stands out to you that is painful that they had to get left out of the book? The first ones that are maybe honorable mention.
We plan our flag on these are the 501. Okay, right. This is it. There was no 502.
It's a hard line. Works out perfectly.
So, does that mean there weren't some albums we have personal affection for? Yes, but these are the 501. This is the hill we climbed and the flag we plant. And the others, the others were albums we liked, but these are the 501.
I do like 501 how you stick to your guns and always
number.
Have
well, yeah. 501 is a pretty big number.
It feels like a big number till you make a spreadsheet that has 2,500 on it.
That's true. And then all of a sudden, still no Juice Newton.
And then all of a sudden, exactly. And then all of a sudden, it's the other problem. Like, oh my God, how are we going to get down to 501? When we started the 90s book, it was 501. Are we going to get that many? And like I say, there's your spreadsheet at 2,500 or more. And I know the 70s spreadsheet is already beyond. So, and that's what makes for, again, the euphemistic discussions and the hand wringing and a lot of debate. But, the more of that discussion you have, the more you hone in on what truly are the essentials.
Do you start by exporting a list, or do you start by making your list based on what's on the top of your head, or through discussion, or how do you generate that initial list of the 2,500 albums?
You heard me with that on the top of your head comment. It's kind of a combination of all the above. So when I come up
Okay.
with the first list, and yeah, the first blush is off the top of my head.
Sure.
Make the list. Then I go through things like the Village Voice Paz and Jop polls for each year, the Rolling Stone, best of list. I do a lot of Googling, and that's how I create an initial list that I then send out to the contributors, and then they come back with additional choices, and we bat those around. So it is that's about a 3-week to a month long process of just trading it back and forth and,
Sure.
and dialogue.
Okay.
I don't remember if we asked you this on the last one, but how do you determine who does the write-up for which album? There must be some where you have to fight over it.
Oh, there are, and bribes count. You laugh, but talk to any of the contributors. Some of it's very obvious. I know, because I know all these people, I know who's best suited for what, and it really does come down to that. My partner who lives here with me, I mean, she was the obvious go-to for a lot of the soundtracks. She grew up then, so she would sit there and tell me her memories of watching those movies or listening to those songs, and it's like, great, put that in the book. I have others who are my headbangers, and others who are my alt rock snobs.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so it's a lot like that. I wind up losing a lot of my favorite albums because I'm the team captain, and you gotta let your players play.
That's
and
right.
So I wind up with a lot of the mop up, which is fine. Which is.
But no, there's no mop up because they're the 501 essentials.
Oh yeah,
they all belong, and there are no others.
Oh, they all belong. No, I'm not mopping up poop. I'm just mopping up I'm not mopping up the albums that the other people didn't choose. Who we did miss as a hard choice was Elvis Costello. We didn't talk about, and there was a guy who went freaking nuts from the time he started putting out records in the 70s all the way through the 80s. And that was a tough cut down, to get to too. So yeah, so he was the other one, along with Prince and REM and Madonna and the others we mentioned.
Is there anyone in the book, either artist or album again, but is there anyone that stands out as being the most underrated? Like, how come this album didn't blow up more than it did, but it was good enough to make the list?
Yeah. Well, I just mentioned Foster and Lloyd, great duo of writers, independent writers down in Nashville, who record executives suggested you should become a band, and they made a couple of great albums, including their first ones. The first one, which we have in here, and they were part of that. It was the pre-Young Country Music. There was an attempt to brand that as This Country's Rockin'. And, William Lee Golden from the Oak Ridge Boys was in that mix, and Sweethearts of the Rodeo were in that mix. And it just never took off as a movement. It took country radio. Country radio wasn't ready to embrace it as a brand. And therefore, a lot of those artists got lost between the crack. But that Foster and Lloyd album, and also Little Steven, when he left the E Street Band, Springsteen's E Street Band, he started his own band called the Disciples of Soul, which was essentially his version of Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes, who he produced. But he formed this band, the Disciples of Soul, and they made an album called Men Without Women. Came out, pretty sure it was 81. Titanic soul rock album. Amazing. Big horn section, but big rock riffs as part of it, and R&B melodies and arrangements. And that's an album I still listen to a whole lot. Amazing record. And anybody, I steer anybody to that record and go listen to it. And it was a life changer caliber type of album.
So the book is organized chronologically. It's not ranked at all.
Correct.
But who would be in that number one slot?
That's why it's five. That's why it's arranged. We don't. It's funny.
In your view,
for as much as this is part of what we do as music journalists, the thing I like doing least, believe it or not, is making lists. My year-end list is not a joyful task. I don't care. I don't care. And so
you sound like my wife. She hates the lists that we do on this show. It's like, why do you have to make lists all the time?
But you know what? I read the lists, I consume them myself. I'm happy to be part of debates about the lists and all that. But in the end, I'm not. And even the way I do my year-end lists, it's like, here's the 12 basically the 12 essential albums you got to hear from this year. I don't say this is the one you have to hear. And so I will not do it for this book, because I feel like that. I also feel like that does a disservice to the music. That turns the art into a debate, into a discussion, and into clickbait.
Oh, sure.
And it really is. The discussion should be about the discussion should be on a larger scale, and it should be about a larger body of work. So that's why we do it like this, rather
that's
than
a really good point. And I think why I like these books, because they aren't ranked or anything, because you said clickbait there, and that's so much of what you read online is they'll put out a ranking of whatever, especially like music, because people have such strong opinions on it, and there's no rhyme or reason to how you could possibly rank them, and all it does is just get people to fight, and it's kind of lazy, I think. But the way you do it here with these books, it's like, okay, you can just enjoy it, and you can still discuss and talk about it, but you don't. It's different. Like, we can talk about Juice Newton, but whatever.
And if there's going to be a fight, by doing it this way, it means you've got to pay attention. You've got to go all the way through here,
right,
and figure out what you disagree with, and that means you're going to think about it on a larger scale, and that's what we want, because this is a large scale discussion. It absolutely is.
I have to let you know what I did do, and I think I'm going to try it with this book now too, is that with the 90s book, for about 2 months straight, what I did is I got on a treadmill, but every day before getting on the treadmill, I would close my eyes literally, and I'd open the book to a random page, put my finger on the page, whatever album that I landed on, that's what I was listening to, for better or for worse in some cases. But that's what I would listen to on the treadmill that day.
He's not lying, because he would send it to us every morning.
I would send it to Brad and Gifford. And so it lasted for about 2 months probably, and then I just got away from.
That's a great way to do it. You're going to find a few of them that don't quite keep the rhythm you might want for your walk.
I can confirm he did land on a couple ones that he probably you never heard of and didn't know anything about, but he still
that's what was fun about it though too, because if I did it on my own, if I actually went and picked, then I wouldn't branch out, or I'd be less likely to branch out. What I wanted to do is branch out. In some cases, I would get something that I really loved already anyway, and it was fun that way. But it also kind of forced me to branch out and listen to stuff that I wouldn't normally listen to, and pick up on a few things that way.
Yeah, some of those electronic albums are great for like a treadmill thing.
Yeah,
they really are, because they'll get your groove, BPMs will get your heart rate going.
That's true. Yep. And I hit a few of those.
Good.
Pete, did you have any other questions you were going to ask?
I think we hit the main questions that I wanted to.
Yeah, me too. So we want to thank you again for coming on. So what's next for Gary Graff? What are you? I know you're seeing concerts all the time. I follow you on Instagram, but what are you looking forward to, or what should people go find?
There's a lot. I mean, there's a new David Byrne album coming out that's going to be exciting, and he's going to be on the road. That guy did 2 of my 5 favorite concerts in my life. So
say that my brother and brother-in-law are both going to see him in a couple months, and they're very, very excited.
Yeah, I mean, We Came as Romans, a good band to hear out, here in Detroit, put out a really great album. There's a box set celebrating 50 years of Antones, the great blues club down in Austin, Texas, that has some great stuff on it. So yeah, there's a lot coming up. Looking forward to Oasis being in the U.S. I don't think it's gonna quite have the mania that they did in England. I mean, because England, they are of the soil.
Yeah, Brad's not a big Oasis guy.
That's a dirty word for me. I loved Oasis in the 90s. I was a bigger fan than anybody I knew, and I hate them now. I just despise those
Why
guys.
Why do you hate them?
Well, first of all, their music to me just didn't last. I don't like it anymore. But I saw this documentary. We talked about Michael Hutchence earlier. Yeah. And the way he dissed Michael Hutchence on stage, such a little puke. I couldn't get over it. I'm like, these guys, they really are pukes. And I wrote them off.
So I'm convinced. My Oasis theories among them are, we're getting played and we're loving it. Okay. I think in these, 9 years apart, 11, whatever, if you had gone to Mrs. Gallagher's house for Sunday roast, everything would be fine.
That they were fine.
And Liam likes to shoot his mouth off. So does Noel, for that matter. But they're taking the proverbial piss out of everything. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the shtick. And I think that's part of what I liked about them when they came out, and they still got it.
All right. And I did. Like I said, I'm not going to deny I had all their albums in the 90s, but I don't know. I outgrew them. I got mad at them, and I'm holding a grudge forever.
I do feel like the first two hold up as, bona fide classics. And
yeah, I think the first one especially. The second one was bigger, but I think definitely maybe was probably if I was going to have to listen to one again, that's the one I'd put in.
That's the Discovery album. That's wow, this is where this come from. This is great.
It was great.
Oh yeah. See, now you have.
Now Brad's going to get back
into that fondness again.
Just but the key word there was I'm done with it. I got to stick to my guns too.
They're your Juice Newton.
That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, this has been a lot of fun. We've had you on twice. It's a lot of fun to have you on. Great to listen to your knowledge on the 80s and 90s, and hopefully we'll have you back on for that 70s book that I hope is coming out very soon. And
I'll tell all the good people listening, if you buy your 80s and 90s books, it'll make the 70s book that much more likely to happen.
Yep.
That's for sure.
Or if you do the aughts instead, I mean, that's one we'll be a lot more familiar with the music.
That'll be you'll be familiar. You'll be familiar with the.
Well, yeah, we will, just not like the full album.
You wouldn't have lived through it, damn you.
Exactly.
damn you, youngsters.
But just before we let you go, as we wrap it up, we'll just, for our audience who's listening, I mean, our next two episodes tie right into this, because next week we're going to do Run DMC. The Raising Hell album, and we're gonna draft our favorite 80s hip hop and rap songs. And then the next week we're gonna do, by some popular demand, we're gonna do a Metallica episode.
Can't go wrong there.
It ties right into this, kind of transitions into our next couple here. So we're very excited about those.
I'll be listening.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Hey, Brad.
Hey, what?
What band has the best trademark look of all of them?
Well, I don't think they were on MTV, but Preacher Row, if they would have got on there, they would have been huge.
Good one.
All right. That's it. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you guys very much again.
Bye.
alone to fear. No one's here to comfort me. Sorry for what I have done. Sorry that your song is gone. 7 steps and it will be my last. Hands tied, tell me on my back. Hard down and I look to you. I'm scared but there's nothing I can do.